The San Antonio Spurs are quietly building a dynasty. After recently being rewarded with the #1 overall selection, it's most likely that the Spurs are going to draft Victor Wembanyama. And just due to the addition of Victor alone, that's already going to make the Spurs a significantly better team than they are currently. Because we've never seen someone like this guy. We've never seen someone at that size be as mobile as he is, have as many skills as Victor has in terms of his ball handling ability, his overall scoring ability, basketball IQ. We've just never seen someone like Victor Wembanyama. But also, when you look at some of the other guys that the Spurs currently have on the roster, a lot of these guys are very underrated and young players that I think have potential in the long-term future. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports. I make opinionated NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention that I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. After having a ton of success over the last 20 or so seasons, literally making the playoffs each and every year, the Spurs finally decided it was time to rebuild and move on from the star players they had at the time. They ended up moving on from DeMar DeRozan in a sign and trade deal, and they also ended up eventually moving on from LaMarcus Aldridge, and this was the first time in the past 20 seasons that we've seen the Spurs in a true rebuild. And early on, it was relatively tough. The Spurs didn't have all that many of their own draft picks at the time, and they also weren't playing all that well, so it was kind of difficult to watch at times. But after a couple of years of drafting some guys and a couple of years of developing some of the guys they already had on the roster, the Spurs were starting to build something. Although they still weren't all that good, at least they had some guys on the roster that were seen to be players that they would have in the long-term future. But then after they decided to move on from their best player at the time in DeJounte Murray, who was also a pretty young guy, this season the Spurs ended up being one of the worst teams in the NBA. But even though the Spurs record-wise were one of the worst teams in the league, when you actually looked at the roster, it was pretty clear that they were actually building something. Because when you look at the roster at this point, I think they have a couple of players on their team that you can identify as guys that have potential, and you can identify as guys that would probably be a part of the long-term future in San Antonio. And the guys that I'm talking about are Jeremy Sochan. He's a guy who the Spurs just drafted, and I actually think has a ton of potential. Also, Keldon Johnson, he's a guy who really improved his game over the years, and at this point I would say he's a pretty nice player out there. You talk about Devin Vassell, who originally came into the NBA as a 3-and-D type guy, and even though he still is that, he also added some other aspects to his game that really made him an even better player at this point. Devontae Graham is also a pretty nice young guy. Trey Jones has been playing relatively well, and I just think there's a bunch of different players on this roster that are actually very good and are players that I'm extremely excited to see their development over the years. But of course, the most successful part of the season for the Spurs was they were able to eventually get that #1 overall selection, and they're probably going to draft Victor Wembanyama. So at this point, it's pretty clear that the Spurs have some nice players on the roster, but in order to be a dynasty, you need to have multiple all-stars and some superstars on your roster. So why do I think the Spurs are going to be a future dynasty out there? Well, I think the first and most obvious has to be the fact that they're going to draft Victor Wembanyama. When you look at Victor's game, it's pretty clear that this guy's a generational type talent, and we've never seen a player really close to this guy. Victor is 7'2" in size with a phenomenal wingspan, but he also has the skills of a point guard out there. He has a capability to score from that 3-point range at a pretty high level, and he has the capability to create for himself. Because at that 7'2" size, just having a nice 3-point jump shot alone makes you very effective, because nobody's going to block that shot or really even get a good contest from out there. But also, Victor has a really nice ability to cross over into a 3-point jump shot, sidestep, step back, and sometimes even hit a post turnaround fade from 3-point range, which is just something that's unheard of. We've never seen really anybody ever do that. But moving on to his mid-range shooting ability, Victor also has a really good ability from this range as well. As of course, he has a nice catch and shoot mid-range jump shot with that great wingspan and 7'2" size that would make it very difficult for anybody to get a true contest and basically impossible to block. But he also has all those same abilities that he does from that 3-point range in terms of crossover, sidestep, step back, even has a pretty nice post turnaround fadeaway, and overall from that mid-range area, Victor is also really good. But driving all the way to the basket, what makes Victor unique is not only does he have a nice touch around the basket, but he also has the capability to drive from the top of the key and get all the way to the basket and finish around players with crafty layups or even dunk over players at times. Now I guess the one flaw against Victor would be the fact that he is pretty skinny out there, but at the same time that's a huge reason for why he's so versatile offensively and is so mobile out there. So I guess it's a double-edged sword, but overall in terms of his offensive abilities, Victor is extremely talented, and in the NBA I do think he's going to bring a lot of those talents to the league and get even better as the years do progress. It's pretty clear that this guy's an extremely special talent. Now the next reason for why I think the Spurs are going to be a future dynasty is due to all those other players that I mentioned before in the video. Now a lot of those guys like Jeremy Sohan, Keldon Johnson, Trey Jones, Devin Vassell, Devontae Graham, basically none of those guys are close to an all-star level. But even with that being said, I do think they have shown enough to give me confidence that they're going to be pretty good players in the long-term future. Now obviously all these guys are very young, and it's going to take them some time to adjust to the NBA, and it's going to take them some time to get better and better with the years that progress. And I think eventually most of these guys will get to a pretty good level. Now do I think all of these guys or most of these guys are going to be an all-star caliber player? I definitely do not think so. I think most of them probably won't get to that level, but at the end of the day, when you're talking about these young guys, if they can just get to a point where they're really productive out there, there's not really much more you can ask from these young guys. And I do think basically all those players that I mentioned are going to be at least productive out there, and maybe even a little bit better. Maybe some of them do make it to an all-star level, but at the bare minimum, I think they're going to be at least pretty good players out there. But the last reason for why I think the Spurs team is eventually going to turn into a dynasty has to be due to their head coach in Greg Popovich. Now one caveat that I will mention is Greg obviously is getting a little bit older out there, and it seems like every season people are asking if he's going to retire or not. But it seems like every season that people ask him, he doesn't end up retiring, so who knows how much longer he has under his belt. It could be another 5 seasons, it could be another 1 season. Nobody really knows how much longer he's going to coach. But as long as Greg Popovich does coach, I do think the Spurs are in great hands. It's pretty clear over the years that Greg Popovich is just an amazing coach out there, and when you give him younger players that are willing to buy in but are also extremely talented, the sky's the limit for the Spurs. And I think even besides the general improvement that these young guys are just going to make just solely due to experience, the fact that they have such a great coaching staff in there as well, in terms of in the game but also in terms of out of the game, is just going to help some of these younger guys so significantly, and I do think they would be much better players with the Spurs than they probably would have been for other teams. The Spurs have been known to be very good at developing young talent, and now they're getting a ton of it, so I'm extremely excited to see what the Spurs could eventually do after these guys get some more experience under their belts. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening with the San Antonio Spurs. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think the San Antonio Spurs are going to be a future dynasty, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.